The Apple TV 4K is just the streaming box we've been waiting for. It brings together the excellent interface from the 2015 model, together with the long-awaited ability to watch movies and TV shows in 4K and HDR. And most importantly, it seriously drives down the cost of digital 4K releases. While it's not quite perfect yet, the Apple TV 4K is a good start for Apple as it moves beyond HD video. At first glance, it's tough to tell the new Apple TV apart from its predecessor. They both have the same plastic, boxy design with glossy sides and a matte top. There are a few small differences though. The new model is raised up slightly with larger air vents, which helps to keep its faster processor cool. It also doesn't have a diagnostic USB-C port on the back. Instead, it features an HDMI port, an upgraded gigabit Ethernet jack, and a power connection. As for the Apple TV's slim remote, it's mostly the same. A small ring around the menu button is the only noticeable tweak. That helps you hit the button easily in the dark, and it's also a tactile way to let you know you're holding the remote correctly. The buttons for heading back to the home screen, Siri voice control, play, pause, and volume controls haven't really changed at all. Its motion control capabilities are still intact, but you'll mainly be using that for some games. This new model won't win over haters of the original remote, but as someone who actually liked the last model, I found it just as easy to use. It still doesn't make much sense to throw glass on a slim remote though, especially for something that'll inevitably get crushed in your couch. Under the hood, the Apple TV 4K is powered by the A10X Fusion processor, the same chip inside the newest iPad Pro models. Setting up the Apple TV 4K was pretty simple. Just plug in your Wi-Fi credentials, enter your iCloud account, and you're good to go. If you have an iOS device nearby, you can also hold it near the Apple TV during setup to transfer all of your settings. As you can tell by the name, the big difference with this new set-top box is 4K support, something that competitors like Roku and Amazon's Fire TV have supported for years. 4K offers 4 times as many pixels as 1080p HD, which means it's perfect for bringing out fine detail. Most people won't be able to see much of a difference with the jump to 4K from their normal viewing distance. You need to be sitting really close to a set 55 inches or larger to notice any improvement. The more useful feature is HDR, or High Dynamic Range Video. On compatible TVs, it lets you see more intense brightness, deeper dark levels, and a wider range of colors than you're used to with the standard dynamic range, or SDR. If you're looking for the truly noticeable change with the new video formats, HDR is it. On newer films, the difference between an HDR and standard version can feel like night and day. Apple wisely chose to support both standards for the technology, HDR10 and Dolby Vision. In typical Apple fashion, it's also supporting these new formats in a slightly different way. Unlike most set-top boxes, which enable HDR when you're watching video that supports it, the Apple TV 4K always has HDR enabled. Apple says this helps to avoid annoying flickering that occurs on some TVs when they switch in and out of HDR modes. For now, the only 4K HDR-enabled content Apple's offering is in the iTunes Movies app. There's an entire section dedicated to the high-resolution films. It's a slim selection now of around 120 movies, but that's on par with Vudu's 4K library. Apple also boldly chose not to price 4K films any higher than their HD versions. That means you'll be able to buy them between $15 and $20, and rent them for $6. And just as the company promised, your existing iTunes purchases will also get upgraded to the new format for free. In my library of 50 films, I noticed that my copies of Star Trek Beyond, Arrival, The Lego Movie, Kingsman, and La La Land were all instantly bumped up. On Vudu, a 4K film typically costs $30 and rents for $10, and there's no free upgrading either. Apple is definitely late to the party with 4K HDR, but it'll likely push the entire industry towards reducing their prices. That's a win for everyone, not just Apple fans. Most consumers are used to watching things via subscription services like Netflix and Hulu, so high prices might turn them off from even considering digital purchases and rentals in the first place. And speaking of Netflix, at this point it's the only third-party service supporting 4K on the Apple TV. There's an Amazon Prime Video app coming up, but it's unclear when that'll land. The box doesn't support 4K on YouTube either, because Apple hasn't adopted Google's OpenVP9 codec. There's no word on when that's arriving, but given that YouTube is home to plenty of 4K video, it's something that both Apple and Google will likely want to fix soon. Hulu also offers 4K streaming on game consoles, and Apple says it's in talks about bringing that over to the TV eventually. So how do the souped-up movies look on the new Apple TV? In a word, fantastic. Kong Skull Island ended up being the ideal 4K HDR demo on my LG OLED TV set. It features scenes with plenty of bright elements as well as detailed dark portions. At times, both the extreme brightness and darkness show up at the same time, thanks to the versatility of HDR. I had to shield my eyes a bit when Kong stands in front of the bright tropical sun, but I could still make out details in his dark fur. The film's many explosions, not to mention other giant monsters, also looked incredible thanks to the new video technology. Baby Driver is a much brighter film than Kong, but its colorful palette also pops off the screen with 4K HDR. The formats also help with the film's many action sequences. There's a bit more oomph as every gun fired, and I could make out even more detail during the long chase sequences. In many ways, the film looked more impressive than it did in an actual theater. On Netflix, I ran through my usual 4K HDR demos and came away impressed. Daredevil, a show that tends to be very dark, looked just as good as it did on my TV's built-in app. The new formats came in especially handy for the show's nighttime fight scenes. On my old 1080p plasma set, it was sometimes difficult to make out the intricacies of its incredible choreography. Chef's Table, meanwhile, almost made it seem like I could taste all of the fine dining being featured. As for games, there weren't many new titles to show off, but the Apple TV did run Transistor a bit more smoothly than the last model. In the future, you can look forward to Sky, the next game from the Journey creator Genova Chen, as well as an adaptation of the creepy indie game Inside. While Apple is off to a good start, there's definitely plenty of room for it to improve. Its 4K library is missing major films from studios like Disney and franchises like The Fast and the Furious, and the company clearly needs to get more 4K-enabled services on board. The Apple TV 4K starts at $179 for the 32GB model, up from $149 for the last version. There's also a 64GB model for $199, but that's mainly meant for people who plan to download plenty of games. In comparison, you can pick up a $100 Roku box or Amazon Fire TV to watch a wider assortment of 4K HDR video. And if you got a new TV, there's a good chance your built-in apps will be enough. But those options also don't give you access to iTunes and Apple's heavily discounted 4K library, which are the set-top box's biggest selling points. The Apple TV 4K does everything you'd expect it to do. What's surprising is the way Apple is offering 4K downloads and rentals to consumers. In a world where people are buying fewer films and the current best physical media format might not be sticking around for long, it serves an important role by making 4K and HDR films more accessible. The Apple TV 4K isn't perfect, but it's off to a good start.